We now welcome James Early, who's a member of the board of the Institute for Policy Studies. James, thank you so much for joining us here at teleSUR once again today. James, hi, can you hear me?
Hear you, yes.
Hi, James. Thank you for being with us once again. James, some might ask how important are regional or local elections in this case in Venezuela? Why are they so important?
Well, regional and local elections are especially important given that they are the elections closest to the ordinary citizen in the country. The electoral battleground, and I think it should be seen as a battleground, is one of various battlegrounds. The other is the popular organization that goes on between elections, so that elections become then an important barometer of how people are seeing the negotiation of power in their country and how it is affecting their material interest, as well as how it is affecting their outlook of what kind of country they want to do. In the context of what has been going on in Venezuela, in terms of particularly the U.S. Economic, financial, and mediatic warfare against Venezuela, this is a significant development that has brought the peaceful dimension of the opposition into proactive play in relationship to the Maduro administration, as well as the other 52 some odd parties and the 20 indigenous movements that you have mentioned, which shows that there is a now more proactive dynamic process going on, not the abstentionism that was backed by the U.S. government and the U.S. State Department in 2016 and 2018. And so this is to be seen as progress under the Maduro administration to stimulate citizen involvement in where they want to take their country. What is it that they want to defend, and how do they want to defend it? So these are very, very important elections that set the backdrop for the 2024 next presidential elections.
As you said, these elections see broad political participation, even from opposition parties that have previously called to boycott the elections in the country. What does this tell us about the current political scene in Venezuela? And also, what's the reaction from the U.S.?
Well, within Venezuela, observing from the outside, I think what is clear is that the Maduro administration has been able to fight off the radical, racist, violent opposition backed particularly by the former Trump administration here in Washington, D.C., and also backed by the Biden-Harris Democratic Party administration. That right-wing violent element has been sidelined, at least for the moment. And so that this has opened up the possibility where, despite the ideological and political differences that some Venezuelans may have with the direction of the country under the Maduro administration, it allows them to find common purpose in national interest, a national interest that is sovereign, that is independent, and that is self-determined, and that uplifts all Venezuelans. It does not eradicate the ideological and political differences, but it does contribute to the overall advancement of the nation. So it is a particularly important development within Venezuela, which will have implications for the region, particularly with Venezuela's role in the community of Latin American and Caribbean nations, and its relationship with its southern nations as the pink tide seems to be rolling in again. We have to look forward to what will happen in Brazil, what will become of the elections in Chile, and with the elections to come next Sunday, I think it is, in Honduras. So it has both positive national and regional implications. From the vantage point of the United States, it is a difficult situation in which the Biden-Harris administration will continue to try to overthrow the democratic will if indeed the Maduro administration comes out as winners in these local and regional elections. However, the correlation of forces within Latin America, particularly those who are criticizing and defecting from the Organization of American States, who are calling for a closer consolidation of mutual interest and unity in practice despite ideological and political differences among countries in the Caribbean and Latin America, they will become a positive leveraging factor that will force the Biden-Harris administration to really find some level, perhaps, of compromise with the Maduro administration. There are already differences within the Democratic Party that controls both the White House, barely controls the Congress and the Senate, with Congressman Meeks, who's head of the Foreign Relations Committee, who has differed with the Biden administration and called for them to drop the sanctions, recognizing that the past election of the National Assembly sets a new basis of at least practical or pragmatic unity among the opposition and the Maduro administration, such that it opens up an opportunity for the Biden-Harris administration to be pushed to engage in a more peaceful way with the Maduro administration. It should be noted that the U.S. press, the mainstream press, I'm not speaking of right-wing press now, but the so-called liberal press, is fairly generally aligned with the lack of factual analysis of what is going on in Venezuela, and takes a very the Maduro administration. However, underneath that mediatic war that is going on against self-determination and sovereignty within Venezuela are thousands of U.S. citizens who support Venezuelans identifying and solving and handling their own problems without interference, particularly interference from the United States government. So it is a changed process within the U.S. Now that the Maduro administration has been able to work with the more peaceful element of the opposition in Venezuela, bringing in Latin American countries, as well as Western Europe stepping forward, coming as observers to these elections. It shows a change on the battlefront, if you will, against the Maduro administration. And it speaks to the statecraft of the Maduro administration, notwithstanding whatever critiques, legitimate and solid critiques, may be occurring both from the more conservative opposition within Venezuela and or from the leftist opposition. They are at least involved in a unity process to uplift the material life of all Venezuelans and to peacefully debate their differences.
James, as you say, very important that context there. We are seeing a very different situation in Venezuela with this broad participation in this Sunday's elections, which could, as you say, push the United States to have a slightly more reasonable relationship in terms of how it interacts with the Venezuelan government. In terms of Venezuela itself domestically, in the past, opposition parties who have lost at elections have then begun to cry fraud. Do you think that's a possibility in this case?
I'm sorry, I did not hear the last part of your question, that opposition parties who have lost have done what?
Who have lost in the election processes in Venezuela have then begun to cry fraud and said that the elections were fraudulent and that explains their losses. Do you think we could see that from some elements of these opposition parties?
I definitely expect that we will see charges of fraud. However, this is where the importance of international observers, no matter what their ideological or political perspectives are, speaking to the efficacy of the Venezuelan electoral process. The Carter Institute out of Atlanta, Georgia, I understand, is once again participating as a part of many international observers from across the Americas. A large group from the United States is also there. A significant group from the European Union and from other Latin American countries are also there. We must recall that former President Carter, while not in full agreement with past President Hugo Chavez, indicated honestly, objectively, that Venezuela had invested in the most sophisticated, fraud-proof electoral system of paper ballots and the like, other ways of verifying the efficacy and the legitimacy of the elections. And so that these groups are there again to observe, and they have come certainly doing their homework before arriving to suggest that they believe that there is a stable system set up by the National Electoral Commission, and therein, despite what I expect to be cries of fraud from some, we are expecting that this election will be verified as having been generally a fair election.
James, if we see gains for opposition parties in Venezuela, for example, at the state level with governors, could that lead to some kind of change in terms of the balance of power? Could it even lead to opposition forces at a regional level trying to challenge the national government?
Indeed, if whether they win or not, they will continue to challenge the national government. And this is where we must take the long view of the multiple number of elections that have been held in Venezuela since the beginning of this new century, actually, in which in each instance, the reigning Bolivarian revolutionary forces controlling the state just accepted the electoral process. And so that even where there may be gains among opposition forces, as long as it is done legally and peacefully, I do expect that the Maduro administration will use every instrument within constitutional power to defend its role in governance. But I expect that they will accept the will of the people, and the struggle will continue. Even if the opposition does not win in any significant way, they will continue in a democratic form, as long as it is peaceful, to exercise their critique of governance, and we will see an ongoing negotiation of how state power is to be allotted around different ideological and political agendas to uplift the material circumstances of the citizens, as well as to set the general self-determined direction of the country with regard to its political outlook and its economic organization, and how it will align itself in this multipolar world. So that's the broader complex dynamic in which, yes, I do expect whatever the will of the people at the ballot box, it will be recognized, but that will not stop the political struggle as long as it is a peaceful struggle of which direction the country will take.
James, as you say there, this election will have its impact at the domestic level. And we do have the US, as usual, already undermining the process. But then, as you say, we have the observers from the European Union. So there could be some shift in terms of how they interact with Venezuela. We've seen before this election process, and a reason why we have so many opposition parties participating, are the talks that were held in Mexico between the Venezuelan government and sectors of the opposition. The US has been trying to undermine that process too. In fact, in the last round of the talks in Mexico, we heard the news of the extradition of Alex Saab. What do you think we can expect in terms of that process?
Well, it is my understanding that President Nicolas Maduro has made very clear that he will not re-enter the Mexico discussions with the opposition as long as the U.S. continues to maintain this illegal extradition policy around Saab, and that is going to be a negotiating point. We will have to wait and see how parties on different sides of that conflict will determine the way forward. But at the moment, I would say that the momentum has shifted towards the Maduro Bolivarian revolutionary state governance, and away from both the right-wing opposition and to some degree away from the peaceful patriotic opposition who wants a different direction in the country, but who do agree that there are common factors that they must address, like doing it peacefully and uplifting the economic circumstance, which is affecting negatively all Venezuelans, no matter what their ideological or political outlook is. So it is a dynamic process, but I would say that the balance of momentum has, at least for the moment, shifted more into a proactive and a less reactive position on the part of the Maduro government.
James Early joining us, who's a member of the board of the Institute for Policy Studies and is joining us once again here at teleSUR English. Thank you so much for offering your insight into these crucial elections for Venezuela today.
Thank you for your coverage and for the invitation.
Thank you.